The champagne flute feels impossibly cold in my hand, a stark contrast to the heat rising in my cheeks, in my chest. Around me, the ballroom glitters, a sea of expectant faces, all turned towards the small, makeshift stage. My husband, Richard, stands there, beaming, a microphone in his hand. He's supposed to be giving his retirement speech. He's supposed to be thanking everyone, reflecting on his illustrious career. He's supposed to be looking at me, his wife of 25 years, with at least a semblance of gratitude. Instead, his eyes are fixed on her, Tiffany, his much younger, ridiculously eager assistant, standing just to the side of the stage, practically vibrating with anticipation. A sick, cold dread coils in my stomach. I know that look on his face. It's the one he used to give me a lifetime ago. He clears his throat, the sound amplified, booming through the sudden hush. And as I close this chapter, he says, his voice thick with an emotion I no longer recognize as genuine, I realize that new beginnings are often disguised as endings. He pauses, for dramatic effect, the showman he always is. My breath catches. This isn't in the script we didn't write, but implicitly understood. And so, I want to ask someone very special to embark on a new adventure with me. He turns not to me, but to Tiffany. He steps off the small dais, walks directly to her. The crowd murmurs, a confused, excited ripple. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This can't be happening. Not here.
Not now.
He takes her hand. He actually gets down on one knee. The gasp from the crowd is a collective punch to my gut. A diamond, impossibly large, glints on the ring he pulls from his pocket. Tiffany Miller, he booms, his voice resonating with false sincerity. Will you marry me? Her shriek of delight is amplified by the microphone still live in his other hand. The room erupts, a confusing mix of applause, shocked whispers, and nervous laughter. I stand frozen. The cold champagne flute, the only solid thing in a world that's just tilted off its axis. He did this. He actually did this. In front of everyone. At his own retirement party. My retirement party too, in a way. The end of our era. If you've ever felt the ground completely disappear beneath your feet, if you've ever had your world shatter in a public spectacle, tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this is your first time here, please subscribe. It means more than you can imagine, knowing you're listening. Our life, before this grotesque caricature of a celebration, had a rhythm. A comfortable, predictable cadence. 25 years. A quarter of a century. We built a home, not just a house. We nurtured careers, his more visibly, mine more subtly, woven into the fabric of the same company. Davies and Stone. He was the outgoing CEO, the face, the voice. I was head of internal operations, the quiet engine room, ensuring the ship didn't just sail, but sailed smoothly, efficiently, profitably. People knew me, respected me, but Richard was the star. And I, it seemed, was content to be his anchor, or so he thought. The mornings were a shared ritual. Coffee, the scent of dark roast filling the kitchen. The rustle of newspapers, though increasingly, it was tablets displaying the news. We discuss headlines, company gossip, the mundane minutiae of upcoming meetings. There was a comfort in it, a sense of shared history etched into the chipped ceramic of our favorite mugs. Lately, though, the comfort had felt thin, strained, like a favorite sweater worn too many times, the thread starting to give. His laughter didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. His touch, when it came, felt more perfunctory than affectionate. I'd attributed it to stress. The impending retirement, the weight of handing over his legacy. I tried to be more supportive, more understanding. I suggested a vacation, just the two of us, after the transition. He'd smiled, a quick, dismissive flash of teeth. We'll see, darling. So much to sort out. The sorting out seemed to involve a lot of late nights at the office, a lot of hush phone calls he'd take in his study. The door firmly closed. When I'd ask, he'd wave a hand vaguely. Just tying up loose ends, Sarah. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. Or, at least, I thought I did. I knew the pressure. I knew the demands. I'd lived them alongside him, in my own way, for decades. His announcement of retirement, when it came a few months ago, felt abrupt. We talked about it, of course, in abstract terms. One day, he'd say, when the time is right, but suddenly, the time was now. He'd called a special meeting with the board, then come home, poured himself a larger-than-usual scotch, and informed me, almost as an afterthought, decided to pull the trigger. I'm retiring at the end of the quarter. Just like that. No deep discussion with me, his partner in life, and in many ways in business. No lengthy weighing of pros and cons. Just a decision. Made. Presented. Oh, I'd said, trying to keep the surprise, the slight sting of being excluded, out of my voice. That's sudden. Is everything all right? He'd swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Never better.
Just time for a change.
Time to enjoy life. And for the company to get some new blood at the helm, his smile was tight. It's all set. The board is handling the search for my replacement. My farewell party will be the big send-off. A farewell party. He spoke of it with an almost boyish enthusiasm, an excitement that felt out of character for the typically stoic Richard. He threw himself into the planning, or rather, he threw Tiffany, his executive assistant, into the planning. She was suddenly everywhere. In our home, measuring spaces for hypothetical decorations. On the phone with caterers, her voice bright and overly familiar. Richard wants only the best, she'd trill, as if I were a distant acquaintance, not the woman who knew his preference for single malt over blended before she even knew his last name.
Tiffany.
She was young, barely 30, with a mane of blonde hair that always seemed to catch the light and a smile that was permanently, dazzlingly affixed to her face. She'd joined the company about 2 years ago, plucked from a pool of eager applicants, and quickly attached herself to Richard. A real go-getter, he'd called her. Sharp as a tack. I'd found her cloying. Ambitious to a fault, her sweetness edged with something metallic I couldn't quite name. But I was busy. I had my own department, my own fires to put out. I dismissed her as a common type, the kind that orbited power, hoping some of it would rub off. I never imagined this. The initial days after his retirement announcement were a blur of forced smiles and congratulations from colleagues. He'll be missed, they'd say. What will you do with all that free time, Sarah? I'd murmur something about projects around the house, travel, perhaps consulting. Inside, a quiet alarm bell was ringing. Something felt off. Richard was too cheerful, too eager to shed a career that had defined him. I started small, just observing. The way he'd light up when Tiffany's name was mentioned in connection with the party plans. The almost secretive glances they'd exchange when they thought no one was looking. The late nights didn't stop. If anything, they increased. Party planning is a beast, he'd say, rubbing his temples with a theatrical weariness that didn't quite mask the underlying excitement. I tried to talk to him, really talk, one evening. We were in the living room, the television droning ignored in the corner. Richard. I began, my voice softer than I intended. Are you happy about retiring? Truly. He looked up from his tablet, his expression unreadable. Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? It just seems you're very invested in this party. More than the actual retirement, almost. A flicker of something annoyance? Guilt. Crossed his face before it was smoothed away. It's a celebration, Sarah. My legacy.
I wanted to be perfect, he paused.
Tiffany's been a godsend, handling all the details. I barely have to think about it. A godsend. The word hung in the air, heavy and insincere. My unease began to coalesce into suspicion. I'm not a fool. I run a complex department in a multi-million-dollar company. I deal with logistics, with numbers, with people's deceptions and motivations daily. I started paying closer attention to the little things. The way he guarded his phone, angling it away if I came too close. The scent of a perfume that wasn't mine, faint, almost imperceptible, on his shirts when he came home late. He'd always been meticulous about his appearance, but now there was a new preening, a subtle shift in his wardrobe, younger, more stylish. I started looking at the company financials related to his office expenses. Nothing overtly criminal, not at first. But there were dinners. Lots of dinners. At expensive restaurants. Listed as client entertainment or strategy meetings often, just 2 attendees. And the florist bills. Office decor, the invoices said. But the arrangements described sounded far too romantic for a corporate setting. The rising challenges weren't just about discovering potential infidelity. They were about the crumbling foundation of my entire life. Every shared memory, every laugh, every moment of perceived intimacy was now cast in a sickening, doubtful light. Was any of it real? Or was I just a convenient fixture, a comfortable backdrop for his real life, a life he was apparently planning to live with someone else? I remember one Saturday, I found a receipt in his suit pocket. A jeweler. A very expensive jeweler. For a custom design. My heart plummeted. Our anniversary wasn't for months. My birthday had just passed. He hadn't given me jewelry in years, preferring practical gifts or donations in my name to his favorite charities. I confronted him, the slip of paper trembling in my hand. "What's this, Richard?" He glanced at it, then back at me, his face a perfect mask of nonchalance.
Oh, that.
"It's a corporate gift. For a retiring board member's wife. You know, a thank you for her support over the years." "A custom-designed piece? For a board member's wife we barely know." My voice was sharper than I intended. He sighed a long, put-upon sound. "Sarah, must you question everything? It's company business. Tiffany handled the selection. She has excellent taste." "It's all perfectly appropriate." He turned back to his laptop, dismissing me. Tiffany again. Always Tiffany. Her excellent taste. Her efficiency. Her omnipresence in his excuses. The casual way he lied, the ease with which he brushed off my concerns, was more chilling than an outright confession would have been. It spoke of practice. Of a long-standing deception I had been too blind, or perhaps too trusting, to see. The walls of our beautiful home, the one filled with 25 years of memories, suddenly felt like a meticulously constructed stage set for a play in which I was an unwitting actor. The pressure was immense. Not just from Richard's impending retirement and the party, but from the dawning, horrific realization of his betrayal. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, trying to maintain my composure at work, in front of friends, while inside, a storm raged. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, my mind racing through scenarios, replaying conversations, searching for clues I'd missed. The whispers at work started, subtle at first. Sympathetic glances from colleagues who knew Richard was retiring, but perhaps sensed something more. Little comments. "Tiffany's practically running the CEO's office these days, isn't she?" Or, "Richard seems to be grooming Tiffany for something big. She's always in those closed-door meetings." Each comment was a tiny pinprick, adding to the growing wound. I tried to focus on my own role, to find solace in the familiar routines of my department. But even there, the shadow of Richard's deception loomed.
He was still the CEO.
His influence was everywhere. And Tiffany, his smiling, ever-present shadow, was a constant reminder. She'd attend meetings she had no business being in, offering opinions with an authority she hadn't earned, always prefacing them with, "Richard thinks," or as Richard was saying. It was infuriating. She was a parrot, mimicking his words, basking in his reflected glory. The midpoint shift, the moment the ground truly crumbled beneath me, came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, sickening discovery. Richard was usually so careful with his phone, his laptop. But one evening, he was distracted on a long, animated call in the garden with Tiffany, I later realized, judging by his hushed, affectionate tones. He'd left his personal tablet on the coffee table, unlocked. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It felt like a betrayal of my own integrity to snoop, but a stronger, more desperate need for truth propelled me. His emails were open. My eyes scanned the inbox, landing on a thread with a subject line that made my blood run cold. Our future, the next chapter. It was between him and Tiffany. Dozens of emails. Planning. Not just the retirement party, but their life after. Details about a trip to Tuscany, links to romantic villas, discussions about selling his shares in the company, about her potentially taking on a more significant role once he was gone. And then the photos. Hidden in a folder innocuously labeled company retreats, photos of them together. Laughing.
Kissing.
Him looking at her with an adoration I hadn't seen directed at me in years. One photo, in particular, seared itself into my brain. Richard, beaming, with his arm around Tiffany, who was holding up her hand, displaying a ring. A diamond ring. On that finger. The world went silent. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, Richard's voice drifting in from the garden. It all faded to a dull roar. There it was. Irrefutable. Cold. Hard.
Proof.
Not just an affair. A plan. A whole new life built on the ashes of ours. The ring wasn't for a board member's wife. It was for her. The retirement wasn't just an ending for him at Davies and Stone. It was the starting gun for his new life with his mistress. And the party? The party was his grand stage to launch it all, probably with some carefully worded announcement that would paint him as a man embracing a new, well-deserved happiness, and me, presumably, as the supportive, understanding ex-wife-to-be. I closed the tablet, my fingers numb. The betrayal was a physical ache, a vice around my chest. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the meticulous planning, the sheer audacity of it, the way he had looked me in the eye day after day and lied. The casual cruelty. He was going to humiliate me, not just privately but publicly, in front of our colleagues, our friends, the people whose respect I had worked so hard to earn. The deepening crisis wasn't a loud explosion. It was a slow, suffocating implosion. How do you continue to function when the life you knew has been revealed as a lie? I went through the motions.
Work.
Home. Polite conversations. But inside, I was a wreck of shattered trust and burning anger. The retirement party loomed, no longer a celebration, but a public execution of my marriage, my dignity. Sleep was a battlefield I rarely won. When I did drift off, nightmares of the party, of Tiffany's triumphant smile, of Richard's condescending pity, would jolt me awake, my heart pounding, sweat chilling my skin. During the day, I'd catch myself staring into space, replaying his lies, her smug glances, the sickening sweetness of their clandestine emails. I considered my options, each one more unpalatable than the last.
Confront him?
He'd deny it, gaslight me, call me hysterical. He was too practiced a liar. Expose him before the party? Create a scandal that would tarnish the company, hurt innocent people, and still leave me looking like the scorned, bitter wife. Attend the party and endure the humiliation? Let him have his moment, his victory, while I crumbled inside. The thought was unbearable. My friends, my family, they were all excited about the party. Such a wonderful milestone for Richard, my sister had gushed over the phone. You must be so proud. I'd mumbled something noncommittal, the words like ash in my mouth. How could I tell them? How could I admit that my marriage, the one everyone saw as stable, successful, was a sham? The isolation was profound. I was drowning, and no one could see it. The office became a minefield. Tiffany swanned around with an air of barely concealed triumph, dropping hints about exciting new ventures and big changes on the horizon. She treated me with a cloying, condescending pity, as if I were a relic of a bygone era, soon to be swept aside. "Sarah, darling," she'd said one afternoon, her voice dripping with false concern, "you must make sure to get plenty of rest. Richard is so worried you're overdoing it." The audacity. Richard was worried.
About me.
The thought of that party, of him standing on that stage, not just retiring but announcing his new life with her, possibly even proposing right there, it was a specter that haunted my waking hours. He would control the narrative. He would be the hero of his own story, moving on to a brighter future. And I would be the silent, humiliated casualty. The helplessness was the worst part. I felt trapped, powerless. He held all the cards, or so it seemed. He had the stage, the microphone, the adoring, if oblivious, audience. He had Tiffany, his shiny new prize. What did I have? A broken heart, a shattered life, and the prospect of public disgrace. For a while, I truly believed that was all I had left. I imagined myself shrinking, becoming invisible, just trying to survive the inevitable. Then something shifted. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, no dramatic bolt of lightning. It was a slow burn, a tiny ember of defiance igniting amidst the ashes of my despair. I was sitting at my desk late one evening, staring at the city lights, the party just a week away. The image of Richard on that stage, Tiffany by his side, flashed in my mind. The humiliation, the injustice, and then a different thought. A dangerous, exhilarating thought. Why should he control the narrative? Why should I be the victim in his carefully orchestrated drama? This company, Davies and Stone, it wasn't just his. I had poured my life into it too. I knew its inner workings better than anyone, perhaps even better than Richard, who had been so focused on the limelight, on the grand gestures. He was retiring. That meant a power vacuum. His replacement hadn't been announced yet. The board was being uncharacteristically tight-lipped. They were looking for stability, for someone who understood the company culture, for someone who could steer the ship through the transition and beyond. A cold, clear certainty settled over me. I wasn't going to just endure that party. I wasn't going to let him define my future. He thought he was closing a chapter and starting a new one. He had no idea I was about to write an entirely new book. My turning point. It was the moment I stopped mourning the life I thought I had and started fighting for the life I deserved. The anger was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but now it was accompanied by a steely resolve. He wanted a show? I'd give him a show, but it wouldn't be the one he was expecting. The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet, intense activity. I was head of internal operations. I knew the systems, the people, the politics. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. Richard, in his arrogance, had always underestimated me. He saw me as supportive, capable, yes, but ultimately as secondary. His quiet, efficient wife. His quiet, efficient head of ops. He never saw me as a rival. He never saw me as a threat. That was his mistake. I started with the board members. I'd known most of them for years. I had professional relationships, built on mutual respect and a track record of competence. I requested discreet meetings. One by one, I laid out my case. Not as a scorned wife, but as a seasoned executive with a clear vision for the company's future. I didn't sling mud about Richard's personal life, not directly. Instead, I highlighted the need for continuity, for stability, for someone who understood the intricate machinery of Davies and Stone from the inside out. I presented my strategic plans, my ideas for growth, for innovation. I reminded them of my successes, the projects I'd spearheaded, the crises I'd navigated. Some were surprised. They'd never considered me for the top job. Why would they? Richard was the star, and I was Sarah. But as I spoke, I saw the surprise shift to consideration, then to a dawning respect. I knew my numbers. I knew the market. I knew the staff. I also subtly hinted at potential disruptions if an outsider, or someone ill-suited, were brought in. Someone like, say, an overly ambitious assistant with no real experience, someone Richard might be championing for a senior role as a parting gift. The chairman, Mr. Henderson, a man I'd always respected for his shrewdness and integrity, listened intently. He asked tough questions. I answered them, calmly, confidently. I wasn't asking for a favor. I was applying for a job I knew I could do, a job I now realized I wanted. The fight for it became a fight for myself. Simultaneously, I did some digging into Tiffany's work record, her qualifications. It wasn't hard. As head of ops, I had access. Her resume was inflated. Her actual contributions, beyond fetching coffee and managing Richard's schedule, were minimal. There were whispers of her using Richard's influence to bypass procedures, to take credit for others' work. Nothing illegal, perhaps, but certainly unethical. A pattern of opportunism. I compiled a discrete file. Information is power. Richard, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware, caught up in the whirl of his impending triumph. He was more condescending than usual, full of grand pronouncements about his legacy and his exciting future. He'd occasionally throw me a pitying glance, as if I were a piece of old furniture he was about to leave behind. "You'll be all right, Sarah," he said one evening, patting my hand with a magnanimity that made my skin crawl. "You're a strong woman," he had no idea. The plot twist element, the beautiful, blindsiding part, wasn't just about getting the CEO job. It was about the timing. It was about the reveal. I spoke to Henderson again, a final, crucial conversation the day before the party. I laid out my final arguments. I also, very carefully, alluded to the potential for a significant and highly inappropriate personal announcement Richard might be planning for the party. An announcement that could reflect poorly on the company's image and stability if not handled correctly, especially if tied to the succession. I suggested that perhaps, to ensure a smooth transition and maintain corporate dignity, the announcement of the new CEO should also be made at the party, immediately after Richard's farewell. A clear signal of continuity and strong leadership. Henderson, a man who detested public messes and valued discretion, saw the wisdom in it. He was also, I sensed, a little tired of Richard's ego. He agreed. The board would make their decision by morning. The announcement would be ready. The morning of the party, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, a cold, hard core, but it was overlaid with a thrilling, almost terrifying anticipation. I chose my dress with care. Not black, the color of mourning. Not red, the color of overt aggression. But a deep, sapphire blue. Elegant. Powerful. Understated. The color of a calm sea before a storm. Richard was in rare form, preening in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, humming to himself. He barely looked at me. He was already on stage, in his mind. Tiffany had called him 3 times before breakfast, her voice a syrupy stream of adoration and excitement. "She's a wreck," he chuckled, shaking his head. So, emotional about all this, I just smiled faintly. Oh, the emotions were indeed running high. The drive to the hotel ballroom was surreal. Richard chattered about his speech, about who would be there, about the surprise he had planned. He actually winked at me, a conspiratorial, idiotic wink. He thought I was oblivious. He thought I was just his soon-to-be-discarded wife, there to play my supporting role one last time. The ballroom was exactly as I'd dreaded, and exactly as I'd hoped.
Packed.
Glittering. A monument to Richard's ego. Colleagues, clients, a few carefully selected friends and family. And there, near the front, beaming, was Tiffany, in a dress that was far too bright, far too tight, far too expectant. She caught my eye and gave me a little wave, a smile that was pure, unadulterated triumph. She thought this was her night. I took my seat at the head table, next to the empty chair reserved for Richard. Mr. Henderson was on my other side. He gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod. The board had made its decision. My heart beat a steady, determined rhythm. Richard's speech was everything I expected. Long, self-congratulatory, peppered with false modesty and carefully curated anecdotes that painted him as a visionary, a mentor, a leader of unparalleled genius. He thanked the board, his team, even, with a cursory nod in my direction, my long-suffering wife, Sarah, for her support over the years, long-suffering. The irony was almost too much to bear. A ripple of polite applause. Then he paused. The air crackled with anticipation. This was it. The moment he'd been building towards. The moment Tiffany had been waiting for. And as I closed this chapter, he began, his voice dropping to a confidential, emotional tone. I realized that new beginnings are often disguised as endings. He looked directly at Tiffany. Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfectly rehearsed gesture of surprise. "And so," Richard continued, his voice swelling, "I want to ask someone very special to embark on a new adventure with me." He stepped down from the dais. The crowd murmured. I watched, my expression carefully neutral, as he walked towards her. He didn't falter. He didn't even glance my way. He was utterly consumed by his own drama. He reached her. He dropped to one knee. The gasp from the crowd was louder this time, a wave of shock and disbelief. He pulled out the velvet box. The diamond flashed under the spotlights. "Tiffany Miller," he boomed, his voice amplified, echoing through the stunned silence. "Will you marry me?" Her shriek, "Yes. Oh my God, yes," was deafening. She threw her arms around him. He slipped the ring onto her finger. The applause was hesitant at first, confused, then swelled, fueled by a mixture of genuine surprise, awkwardness, and the human instinct to celebrate any public declaration of love, however inappropriate. Tiffany was crying, mascara running, but beaming. Richard helped her to her feet, holding her hand aloft like a trophy. They kissed, a long, showy kiss for the audience. I sat there, watching them. The humiliation I had dreaded for weeks washed over me, but it was different now. Colder. Sharper. It wasn't the helpless despair I'd felt before. It was the detached observation of an impending collision. He'd played his hand. He'd laid his cards on the table, every single one of them. And he thought he'd won. He looked over at me then, a quick, almost pitying glance as if to say, "See? This is my new life. You lose." Mr. Henderson leaned towards me. "Are you ready, Sarah?" he murmured, his voice calm amidst the receding tide of applause for the happy couple. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. I am." He rose, approached the microphone Richard had just abandoned. The crowd quieted again, expecting perhaps a toast to the newly engaged pair or more platitudes about Richard's departure. Tiffany was still clinging to Richard's arm, gazing up at him adoringly, the massive diamond practically blinding under the lights. Richard looked smug, triumphant. He'd done it. He'd pulled off his grand reveal. "Thank you, Richard," Henderson began, his voice steady and authoritative, cutting through the lingering buzz, "for that rather dramatic farewell. And congratulations on your engagement." There was a subtle emphasis on dramatic that I, and perhaps a few others, caught. Tiffany preened. Richard inclined his head, magnanimous. "Richard has indeed left very large shoes to fill," Henderson continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "The board has deliberated long and hard on his successor. We knew we needed someone with vision, with experience, with an intimate understanding of Davies and Stone, and with the unwavering commitment to lead us into the future." A hush fell over the room. This was it. The real announcement. Richard shifted slightly, a flicker of something, impatience? Or perhaps a sudden, dawning unease? Crossing his face. Tiffany was still smiling, but her eyes darted towards the stage, then back to Richard, as if seeking reassurance. "It is therefore my distinct honor," Henderson declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "and my great pleasure, to announce that the board has unanimously chosen, as the new chief executive officer of Davies and Stone." He paused, letting the suspense build, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. "Mrs. Sarah Mitchell." For a split second, there was absolute silence. Utter, complete, stunned silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. Then, a collective gasp, far louder, far more shocked than the one for Richard's proposal. Heads swiveled, eyes, wide with disbelief, fixed on me, then on Richard, then back to me. I saw Richard's face. The smugness, the triumph, it all just drained away. His jaw literally dropped. His eyes, wide and uncomprehending, locked onto Henderson, then flickered wildly towards me. His complexion, moments before flushed with victory, turned a ghastly, chalky white. He looked like he'd been poleaxed. Tiffany's smile froze, then shattered. Her perfectly made-up face contorted in an expression of utter bewilderment, then dawning horror. Her grip on Richard's arm tightened, her knuckles white. She looked from Henderson to me, then to Richard, as if she couldn't process what she was hearing. Her moment, her glorious, triumphant moment, had just been utterly, spectacularly eclipsed. Richard swayed. He put a hand to his chest. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked small, deflated, like a punctured balloon. The applause started then, tentative at first, then growing into a roar, a genuine, enthusiastic wave of support. My colleagues, the people I'd worked with for years, they were looking at me with astonishment, yes, but also with respect, with dawning admiration. Some were already on their feet. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. I smoothed down my sapphire blue dress. I allowed myself a small, composed smile. I met Richard's gaze across the room. His eyes were wild, unseeing. He was still clutching his chest. Tiffany was frantically whispering to him, her face a mask of panic. And then he collapsed. Not dramatically, not like in the movies. He just crumpled. One moment he was standing there, a statue of disbelief. The next his legs gave out, and he folded, sinking to the floor in a heap. Tiffany shrieked, a genuine sound of terror this time, dropping to her knees beside him. The ballroom erupted into chaos. People surged forward. Shouts for a doctor. The celebratory atmosphere instantly transformed into one of alarm and confusion. Mr. Henderson was calling for calm, for someone to call an ambulance. I watched it all, a strange detachment settling over me. My moment of triumph, so carefully planned, so intensely anticipated, was now intertwined with this. His collapse. It wasn't part of my script. Or perhaps, in a way, it was the inevitable, unwritten final scene of his. The paramedics arrived with surprising speed, pushing through the throng of onlookers. They worked on Richard, voices calm and professional amidst Tiffany's hysterical sobs. She was a mess, her glamorous facade completely gone, replaced by tear-streaked makeup and genuine fear. The massive diamond on her finger seemed to mock her, a gaudy symbol of a future that had just imploded. I made my way through the parting crowd towards them, not as a wife, not anymore, but as the new CEO. There were practicalities to manage, a situation to control. Mr. Henderson met me, his expression a mixture of concern for Richard and quiet approval for me. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "this is unfortunate timing." "Indeed," I replied, my voice even. "Is he stable?" "They're taking him to St. Michael's. It looks like a severe anxiety attack, possibly something more."
"We'll know soon," he paused.
"Despite everything, he's still a colleague. You should probably go to the hospital." I nodded. It was the right thing to do. The professional thing. The human thing, even if the human part of me felt numb towards Richard right now. As they wheeled him out on a stretcher, unconscious, with Tiffany trailing behind them, still weeping, a strange quiet fell over the remaining guests. They looked at me, the new CEO, standing there amidst the wreckage of her predecessor's grand exit. What were they thinking? I could only imagine. Pity? Awe? A healthy dose of fear. The aftermath was messy. As expected, Richard had suffered a major cardiac event, brought on, the doctors said, by extreme stress. He survived, but the recovery would be long. He was diminished, physically and emotionally. The arrogant, confident CEO was gone, replaced by a frail, frightened man. Tiffany tried to visit him in the hospital, but his family, his sister mostly, who had flown in, politely but firmly barred her. Her brief, glorious reign as the future Mrs. Richard Mitchell was over before it had even truly begun. The ring, I heard later, was quietly returned. She resigned from Davies and Stone a week later, her position untenable, her reputation in tatters. No golden parachute.
No promotion.
Just a quiet, ignominious exit. The whispers followed her, of course. The ambitious assistant who overplayed her hand and ended up with nothing. There was a certain grim satisfaction in that, I admit, a small, dark part of me that relished her downfall as much as Richard's. My ascension to CEO was anything but smooth. There was speculation, of course. The timing of the announcement, Richard's collapse, it was all too dramatic, too coincidental for some. But Mr. Henderson and the board stood firmly by their decision. They emphasized my qualifications, my experience, my vision. They painted it as a logical, strategic choice, untainted by the personal drama that had unfolded. The first few months were challenging. I had to prove myself, not just as a capable leader, but as someone who could rise above the scandal, someone who could steady the ship. There were long hours, tough decisions, skeptical faces in some of the meetings. But I had spent 25 years learning this company, understanding its strengths, its weaknesses. I knew what needed to be done. I didn't visit Richard much in the hospital or during his convalescence at his sister's. Our lawyers handled the divorce. It was surprisingly amicable on his part. He seemed to have no fight left in him. He signed the papers, agreed to the settlement, a shadow of his former self. All his bluster, his arrogance, had leached out of him on that ballroom floor. He'd wanted to discard me, to begin his shiny new life. Instead, he'd lost everything: his health, his career, his mistress, and a significant portion of his wealth.
And his dignity.
Most of all, his dignity. There was no grand confrontation, no screaming match, no final hashing out of grievances. Our marriage ended not with a bang, but with the quiet scratch of pens on legal documents. Sometimes I wondered if he understood the depth of his betrayal, the pain he had caused. Or if he only regretted getting caught, regretted his own dramatic downfall. I suspected it was the latter. Life as CEO of Davies and Stone is demanding, relentless, but also exhilarating. I found a strength I didn't know I possessed, a voice I didn't realize I had suppressed for so long. I'm good at this. Really good. The company is thriving. We're innovating, expanding. The respect I receive now isn't just polite acknowledgement. It's genuine, earned. There's a bittersweet taste to it all, of course. My success was born from the ashes of my marriage, forged in the fire of betrayal. There are days when a wave of sadness washes over me, for the years I invested, for the love I thought was real. But it's a fleeting sadness now, replaced by a quiet pride in my own resilience, my own ability to not just survive, but to triumph. Richard, I hear, lives quietly now. He never fully recovered his health or his old swagger. He's a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly fortunes can turn, how arrogance can lead to ruin. He tried to write his own ending, to control the narrative. But life, as it often does, had other plans. And so did I. He thought he was pointing the gun at my future, my happiness. Turns out, the barrel was aimed squarely at himself. And I, the quiet, underestimated woman in the background, was the one who pulled a different trigger, the one that launched a new era for the company and for myself. It wasn't just karma hitting him later. It was me being smarter, being stronger, and ultimately winning bigger than he could ever have imagined losing. Thanks for being here, for listening to my story. Subscribing to the channel really does help bring more of these to life, and I'm grateful for every one of you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel.